They laughed when the general asked the janitor for his call sign, until the quiet man looked up and said two words that froze every heart in the room: Iron Ghost. No one knew that behind the mop and the worn boots stood a legend the military thought was long dead. What happened next would change every life on that base forever. Before we begin, if you believe that true heroes don't seek the spotlight, but still shine through kindness and courage, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Now, let's begin. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the hallway of Monroe Air Base, a quiet, constant drone that most people stopped noticing after the first week. But Michael Stone noticed everything. The faint echo of boots in the distance, the hum of an old vending machine, the smell of jet fuel carried through the vents from the hangars 2 blocks away. He pushed his mop bucket along the corridor, its wheels squeaking like the rhythm of a man who had long ago stopped trying to hurry anywhere. His uniform was plain gray, the kind issued to janitorial contractors, yet somehow he carried himself straighter than the officers he cleaned up after. The base was alive even after sunset. Through the glass windows, he could see the distant runway lights, blue and gold dots fading into fog. Somewhere beyond that horizon, he knew men were still flying the machines he once called home. A passing airman offered a distracted nod. Michael nodded back. He didn't speak much, not because he was unfriendly, but because silence had become his language. He moved like a ghost between the echoes of orders and laughter, unseen, unnoticed, indispensable. Inside the officer's lounge, he paused at the doorway. The smell of whiskey-polished leather and expensive cigars met him like an old memory. He had cleaned this same room every night for 3 years, and yet each time he crossed that threshold, it still reminded him of a world he'd once belonged to. He wrung out the mop and began at the far corner, where a portrait of Admiral Stephen Monroe hung above the mantel. The Admiral's steely eyes seemed to follow him, a gaze he had known long ago, in a sky filled with fire. Michael's hands moved automatically. The mop glided over the marble floor with practiced precision. But behind that calm exterior, his mind was never still. He remembered sound before silence: jet engines, screaming radios, crackling, a desperate voice shouting, "They're hit! Ghost break! Left!" Then the blinding flash. Then water. Then nothing. The doctors had called it a miracle that he survived. He called it something else. He had buried his medals, his flight suit, and his call sign the day he buried his wife. The military had offered him counseling promotion, even command of a training unit. He declined them all. Daisy needed him more than the Air Force ever did. Now at 43, he lived for one thing: the quiet mornings when his daughter still called him Dad, with the same innocent awe as when she was 5. The hallway clock struck 9. He packed up, locked the supply closet, and stepped into the cool night. His truck was old paint, faded windshield, cracked, but it always started on the first turn. A country station played softly through the static as he drove home under the pale moonlight. His house sat at the edge of town, a modest single story, with a small porch and a maple tree that shed its leaves like golden feathers each fall. Daisy had insisted on hanging little wind chimes on the porch beams. They tinkled softly as he parked. Inside, the warmth of home met him, the scent of crayons, pancakes, and laundry detergent, his life in 3 fragrances. Daisy sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring a picture of a plane. Her dark hair was tied in 2 uneven pigtails, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Daddy," she said, running to him. "You're home early tonight." He smiled and knelt to her level. "Early. It's almost bedtime for little pilots." She giggled, showing the missing tooth in her grin. "I was drawing you," she said, proudly handing him the paper. It showed a stick figure in a green flight suit beside a jet with wings far too big. Across the top, in uneven letters, "Iron Dad." Michael's throat tightened. "You gave me wings," he said softly. Because you used to fly, she said matter-of-factly. Mom told me once. You were brave. He hesitated, folding the drawing carefully. Flying doesn't make you brave, Daisy. Taking care of people does. She frowned, thinking. Then you're still brave. He kissed her forehead, unable to answer. For a moment, the ghosts in his chest went quiet. Later, after she fell asleep clutching her stuffed bear, Michael sat on the porch. The night was cool, the stars sharp and endless. He lit a single cigarette, not because he liked the taste, but because it gave his hand something to do. In the distance, the sound of a jet rumbled faintly, a reminder that the world kept moving, even when you stopped. He opened the small wooden box beside him. Inside were 4 medals, a faded photograph of his squadron, and a metal tag engraved with 2 words, Iron Ghost. He stared at it for a long time. Once that name had meant something. Fearless, unstoppable, a man who flew into storms others wouldn't touch. Now it was just a ghost story whispered by rookies in flight school. He placed the tag back inside, closed the lid, and whispered a prayer only the wind could hear. Stay safe out there, he murmured to the sky, to his past, to the men he couldn't save. The porch light flickered, and for a heartbeat, he thought of turning it off, letting the darkness have the house just for one night. But then he heard Daisy stir inside, murmuring in her sleep, and he rose, flicking the light steady again. The world might forget the name Iron Ghost, but Daisy never would. And that, he decided, was enough. He looked out once more at the empty street, at the stars that had watched over pilots for generations, and whispered to himself, You're grounded now, old man. Stay grounded. Yet somewhere deep inside, a part of him still listened for engines. The officers' club at Monroe Air Base glittered that night, like a cathedral of glass and arrogance. Crystal chandeliers hung above rows of polished uniforms, medals catching the light like fragments of past glory. Laughter spilled through the room, loud, confident, unrestrained. The kind of laughter that came from people certain of their place in the world. General Marcus Duval stood at the center of it all, his voice booming over the orchestra. He was a man built for attention, tall, broad-shouldered silver hair trimmed to regulation perfection. The rows of ribbons across his chest told stories of strategy meetings more than battlefield scars. He lifted his glass of bourbon. To victory, he declared. To power, precision, and the might of our command, a chorus of hear, hear echoed through the hall. Glasses clinked, and the band shifted to a livelier tune. Samantha Drake watched from the edge of the crowd, her white navy dress uniform immaculate, but her expression distant. She had been transferred here only 3 weeks ago, temporary assignment logistics coordination between branches. She respected the structure, the discipline, but nights like this made her uneasy. The air was too thick with ego, too full of people who had forgotten what the uniform was supposed to mean. She swirled the ice in her untouched glass. Not a fan of the party. Commander, a colonel beside her, asked, grinning. Samantha smiled politely. Just not a fan of parties where people forget who's still out there flying in the dark. He chuckled awkwardly and excused himself. Samantha's eyes moved across the room. Waiters in white jackets carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, the polished brass reflected in their movement. Then, through the glass wall separating the club from the corridor, she caught sight of someone familiar, the janitor she had seen around base. Michael Stone. He was moving quietly, methodically, pushing his mop and bucket down the marble floor outside the lounge. His posture was straight, his movements efficient, and yet there was something deliberate in the way he carried himself, like a man still following formation even when the squadron was gone. Through the open doorway, she saw him pause and adjust a framed photograph that had tilted slightly, an image of Admiral Monroe shaking hands with a group of pilots years ago. Most janitors would have ignored it. Michael straightened it, with care, gave a short nod to no one in particular, and moved on. Duval's booming voice pulled her attention back inside. "And let us never forget," he said, holding up his glass again, "that leadership is earned through confidence, through presence. You can tell the worth of a man by how he carries himself, even when no one's looking." The irony nearly made Samantha laugh. Duval didn't notice the man outside cleaning the floors, didn't realize how easily real worth could go unseen. The laughter roared louder now. Duval was in his element, enjoying his own sound. The brass band shifted into a swing rhythm, and officers began to mingle, forming small circles of ambition and flattery. Then someone near the bar said, "General, did you know your audience includes the janitor again?" "The same one from last week." The crowd turned. There, through the glass doors, Michael was wiping the floor just beyond the entrance, quietly humming to himself. Duval's smirk spread slow and cruel. "Does he not understand? This is an officers-only area." "Probably just doing his job, sir," one of the younger officers murmured. Duval ignored him. "Bring him in," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The room quieted a little, sensing mischief. Samantha's jaw tightened. She knew that tone, the kind of mockery disguised as authority. The airman by the door hesitated, but obeyed, opening the door. "Sir General Duval would like to see you for a moment." Michael paused. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then quietly, he set the mop against the wall and stepped inside. His boots made no sound on the polished floor. The conversations dimmed. Samantha's eyes followed him. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't even look confused. He just seemed calm. Duval raised his glass, a mocking smile curling at his lips. Well, the man of the hour. "Come in, son. You've been keeping our floor spotless, I'll give you that." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Michael nodded once. "Thank you, sir." "Just doing my job." "Just doing your job," Duval repeated with exaggerated gravity. "Tell me something. What's it like spending your days cleaning up after men who actually made something of themselves?" The laughter grew harsher. Samantha's stomach turned. Michael met his gaze without flinching. "It's honest work," he said simply. "The kind that reminds a man to stay humble." The words landed with quiet precision. Duval's smile faltered for a moment. "Humble, you say, I see." He took a step closer, towering over Michael. "Were you ever in service? Or have you always been comfortable with a mop?" Once Michael replied. "A long time ago." Oh, Duval tilted his head mockingly. "And what was your grand contribution to the great machine of defense?" Michael hesitated, his eyes calm, but distant, like he was seeing something the rest couldn't. "I flew." The room chuckled. "You flew?" Duval laughed. "What commercial crop dusters? Or are you going to tell me you were a fighter pilot?" A few officers snickered. Samantha's fists clenched at her sides. She could see the way Michael's hand twitched near his pocket, the smallest hint of restraint. Duval stepped back, making a show of amusement. "Tell you what, let's make this fun. Every pilot has a call sign, don't they?" "What was yours?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The laughter quieted, curious now. Michael looked at him steadily. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, in a voice low but steady, he said, "Iron Ghost." The words seemed to drop through the air like a steel weight hitting water. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted. Then a colonel near the back blinked, whispering something to the man beside him. Another officer frowned, his expression shifting from amusement to disbelief. The band stopped playing. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Samantha felt a strange chill crawl up her spine. Iron Ghost. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the academy, half legend, half rumor. A pilot who vanished after saving an entire squadron. Duval's smirk froze. "I beg your pardon." Michael didn't move. "You asked for my call sign." The general tried to laugh, but it came out forced. "Well, that's..." Creative. But the tension in the room had changed. A major near the front had gone pale. "Sir," he said quietly, "Iron Ghost was real." All eyes turned to him. Duval frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That call sign belonged to a pilot from the old 75th Fighter Squadron A-10 Division. Flew solo missions over hostile territory 20 years ago. He disappeared during Operation Ridgefire. The record said, MIA. The whisper spread like wildfire. Samantha looked back at Michael, her breath catching. His eyes were steady, the faintest flicker of something old pain maybe behind them. He said nothing more. Duval tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "You all take your stories too seriously. This man is a janitor, not a ghost from some classified file." But no one laughed with him this time. Michael gave a small nod. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I have work to finish." He turned, picked up his mop, and walked out. The silence followed him down the hall like a second shadow. Samantha's gaze lingered on his retreating figure. For the first time that night, the glittering world of ranks and medals felt small, almost hollow. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something stirred an old truth she'd nearly forgotten. Real strength doesn't need applause. And for reasons she couldn't yet explain, she suddenly wanted to know everything about the man they called Iron Ghost. The laughter that followed Michael Stone out of the officers' club was thin and nervous, like a sound, made only to fill the silence left behind. For a long moment after the janitor disappeared down the hallway, no one moved. The echo of his name, Iron Ghost, seemed to linger in the air, clinging to the polished glass and the scent of whiskey. General Marcus Duval was the first to break. He forced a laugh, sharp and too loud. "All right, people. Let's not get carried away with ghost stories." But the amusement didn't return. The officers avoided his eyes, murmuring in low voices. Somewhere near the back, a lieutenant whispered, "My father told me about that call sign. Said the pilot disappeared over Calidar Ridge." Samantha Drake didn't join the whispers. She was watching Duval, his smirk twitching at the edges, his eyes darting toward the doorway, as if to make sure Michael wasn't still there. Power had always been Duval's favorite oxygen. The sudden absence of it made him visibly choke. He poured himself another drink, a janitor claiming to be a war legend. Come on, the man's delusional, but no one laughed this time. Samantha turned and walked out. The corridor was quiet, except for the faint squeak of a mop bucket rolling over tile. Down the hall, Michael was rinsing his mop, his movements calm and deliberate. She hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Stone," she said softly. He looked up. His eyes, gray, unreadable, met hers for a moment, before dropping back to his work. "Evening, ma'am." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You didn't have to let him talk to you like that." He gave a half smile, the kind that carried more weariness than humor. "Rank gives a man the freedom to say a lot of things. My job gives me the freedom not to care." Samantha studied him, the way he spoke without bitterness, like a man who had long ago made peace with being invisible. "That call sign you said. Iron Ghost. Was it real?" Michael wrung out the mop and leaned on the handle. "Doesn't matter anymore." But it mattered once she said. He didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the far wall, where a display of retired flight patches hung in neat rows. Somewhere among them she thought one might have been his. Before she could say more, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Duval's voice cut through the air, drunk and dangerous. "There you are." Samantha turned sharply. "General, maybe you should—" "I'm fine," Duval snapped, straightening his jacket. He stopped a few feet from Michael, swaying slightly. "You embarrassed me in front of my officers, Janitor. That's not something you want to make a habit of." Michael's expression didn't change. "I didn't mean to embarrass anyone, sir." "Oh, didn't you?" Duval's voice rose. "You waltz in here spouting fairy tales about being some phantom pilot. What was it, again?" "Iron Ghost. Sounds like a comic book, not a soldier. Samantha took a step forward. General, maybe this isn't the quiet commander. Duval barked, not taking his eyes off Michael. You Navy types are too sentimental. This man cleans floors. He's not a hero. He's a reminder that some people peak early and never recover. Michael's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. He just picked up his mop again. Look at him, Duval continued, sneering. No pride left. A real man would have died with his squadron not hidden behind a mop bucket. The words hit the hallway like a slap. Even Samantha drew a breath, appalled. Michael finally looked up. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Careful, General. Some ghosts don't stay buried. That single line froze Duval for a beat, just long enough for Samantha to see a flash of something raw in the General's face. Fear recognition. She couldn't tell. Then the man laughed, trying to reclaim control. So what, Janitor? You gonna haunt me with your bucket? Michael didn't move. The air seemed to change, denser, quieter. No, he said. I just clean up the mess men like you leave behind. It wasn't loud, but it cut deep. From the end of the hallway, 2 young officers had stopped to watch. Whispers traveled faster than orders in a military base, and already the story of the janitor, who called himself Iron Ghost, was making its rounds. Duval's face flushed red. You think you're clever, don't you? Michael's gaze was steady. No, sir. Just honest. That did it. The general lunged forward, shoving the mop aside. You're done here. Tomorrow morning you're off this base. I'll see to it personally. Michael looked at the mop lying on the floor. If that's what you want. It's what's going to happen, Duval growled, straightening his uniform again. He turned toward Samantha, his voice dripping sarcasm. And Commander Drake, maybe you should pick better company. People might start thinking you respect janitors. Samantha's eyes hardened. Respect is earned, sir. Not demanded. Duval froze, his mouth twitching. He looked between her and Michael, the power slipping from his hands like sand. Finally, he scoffed and walked away, muttering curses under his breath. When he was gone, silence filled the corridor again. Michael bent down, picked up the mop, and resumed cleaning as if nothing had happened. Samantha stood there, conflicted. You're really not going to fight back? He didn't look up. You don't fight a storm with your fists, Commander. You wait for it to pass. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. I'll see you around, Mr. Stone. He gave a faint nod. Good night, ma'am. As she walked away, her mind replayed his words. Iron Ghost. The stories she'd heard as a cadet surfaced. Again, the pilot who flew a solo mission over Ridgefire Valley, who stayed behind to protect his unit after they were ambushed. The radio logs had ended mid-transmission. No one ever found the wreckage. And now, here he was, mopping floors under the same flag he once fought for. Back in the lounge, Duval stood at the bar, gripping his drink so tightly his knuckles whitened. The laughter had died completely now. The party was a ghost of itself. Across the room, a colonel whispered, Sir, with all due respect. If that man really is Iron Ghost, Admiral Monroe would want to know. Duval turned sharply. You'll say nothing, he snapped. Do you understand me? Nothing. The colonel swallowed and nodded, but the whisper had already spread beyond control. By morning, every mechanic, technician, and guard on base would be talking about it. The janitor, with the steel-gray eyes, the one who spoke a name that once haunted the skies. And while the gossip grew, Michael returned home quietly. He parked his truck, turned off the headlights, and sat in the darkness for a while, watching the faint glow of his daughter's nightlight through the window. He didn't care about rumors or ranks. He cared about keeping Daisy's world safe, small and full of light. Still, as he sat there listening to the crickets, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion. Ghosts, after all, had a way of being called back when the living forgot their lessons. Morning came heavy and gray over Monroe Air Base. A low fog crawled across the runways like breath on glass, swallowing the silhouettes of A-10s parked in their neat rows. The hum of generators filled the air, but something quieter, stranger, lingered beneath it. A tension invisible but present, like static before a storm. Rumors had a way of traveling faster than fighter jets. By sunrise, everyone knew. The janitor with the calm eyes. The man who'd spoken 2 words that made officers go silent. Iron Ghost. No one said it openly, of course. Not yet. But in the cafeteria line, voices lowered when Michael Stone walked past. The young airman who used to ignore him now watched with cautious curiosity. Some even stood a little straighter. Michael noticed the change, but pretended not to. He moved as he always did, quietly, efficiently, like part of the machinery that kept the base alive. His uniform bore no rank, yet somehow people stepped aside for him. Now, uncertain why. He entered Hangar B just after 8, pushing his mop cart through the wide bay doors. The smell of jet fuel oil and steel greeted him like an old friend. Mechanics were running pre-flight diagnostics on a Warthog's twin engines, the turbines whining to life in short bursts. He could almost feel the vibration in his bones. One of the mechanics, a young man with grease-streaked hands, glanced up. "Hey, sir, Michael." Michael looked over. "Yeah," the kid hesitated. "You, ever flown one of these before?" Michael smiled faintly. "Once or twice." The kid nodded awkwardly, not sure if it was a joke. "Guess it takes someone who knows them to clean them that good," he said, trying to cover the discomfort. Michael nodded, his eyes tracing the A-10's curved nose, the shark teeth painted just below the cockpit. "She's more than a machine," he murmured. "She's a promise, built to bring everyone home." The mechanic blinked. "That's a poetic way to talk about a plane." "Some things deserve respect," Michael said softly, and turned back to his work. Across the base, General Duval sat in his office, glaring at his coffee, as if it had personally betrayed him. He hadn't slept. Every hour brought another whisper, another sidelong glance from subordinates, who suddenly seemed to question his authority. He'd spent his whole career controlling the narrative, making sure power flowed his way. And now, somehow, a janitor was the story everyone couldn't stop telling. His phone buzzed. The message came through crisp and brief. "Admiral Monroe arriving. 0900 hours. Private briefing requested." Duval's stomach dropped. Monroe. The name alone carried weight. The man was a living monument, a relic of discipline, integrity, and terrifying memory. He stood abruptly, straightened his uniform, and checked his reflection. The face that looked back at him was pale, drawn tight. By the time the Admiral's motorcade rolled through the base gates, half the staff had found excuses to loiter near the main building. The black sedan stopped in front of headquarters, and out stepped Admiral Stephen Monroe. Even in his late 60s, he carried himself like a man who had once stood on carrier decks during storms, unmoved by chaos. His uniform was immaculate, his ribbons a rainbow of service and sacrifice. As he entered the corridor, conversations died mid-sentence. Michael, mopping near the atrium, noticed the sudden hush before he saw the man himself. The years hadn't changed Monroe's gait. Each step measured each breath steady. Their eyes met for a single heartbeat. Recognition flashed, quick, sharp, undeniable. The Admiral stopped. Everyone froze. Sir Duval said, stepping forward with a salute that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Welcome, Admiral Monroe." "We weren't expecting." But Monroe wasn't listening. His gaze stayed on Michael. Slowly, deliberately, the Admiral walked toward him. A murmur rippled through the hall. Samantha Drake appeared at the far end, drawn by the commotion. Monroe stopped a few feet from Michael. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but carried the weight of command. "Permission to speak freely." Mr. Stone? Michael hesitated, then nodded. Always, sir. The Admiral's jaw tightened. You remember Operation Ridgefire? Duval blinked. Ridgefire? Sir Monroe didn't even glance at him. We lost 12 aircraft that night, he said quietly. I was commanding the strike group. We were ambushed mid-flight. If it weren't for one pilot who broke formation and covered the retreat, I wouldn't be standing here today. The hallway was utterly still. That pilot's call sign, Monroe continued, his voice tightening, was Iron Ghost. A whisper shot through the crowd like wind through leaves. Duval's face drained of color. Samantha's eyes widened, confirmation of the legend she'd begun to believe. Monroe straightened to full height, and to everyone's shock, raised his hand in a crisp salute. It's an honor, Iron Ghost, he said. The room gasped. Michael stood motionless, his eyes steady. You shouldn't, sir, he said quietly. That night cost too many good men. The Admiral's voice softened. You brought them home. You saved us. Duval tried to intervene, voice cracking slightly. Sir, this man, he's a civilian employee. You can't possibly think. Monroe turned his gaze like a blade. I don't think, General. I remember. The silence that followed was complete. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed too loud. Monroe looked back at Michael. Why didn't you ever come forward? Michael's answer came after a pause. Because the war didn't end for everyone that night. I didn't want medals, Admiral. I just wanted peace. The Admiral's eyes glistened for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. Peace is earned. And you've earned more than most. He turned to Duval. Effective immediately, this man is to be reinstated as a civilian consultant to the Flight Training Division. His record will reflect his full service. Duval's mouth fell open. Sir, with respect, you've shown none, Monroe cut in coldly. You've mocked a man who lived through fire while you waged your wars over banquet tables. Consider yourself relieved of command until further notice. Gasps echoed through the corridor. Monroe faced Michael again. You once saved my life. I never had the chance to thank you. Until now. Michael shook his head gently. Then consider us even, sir. You saved the country we both served. Monroe's lips curved into the faintest smile. The country could use a few more men like you. With that, the Admiral turned and strode down the hall. Officers parted for him, as though for a passing storm. Samantha watched the entire scene in silence. She'd seen heroism before on paper, in debriefs and carefully worded commendations, but never like this. Not so quiet, not so human. When the Admiral's footsteps faded, she stepped closer to Michael. You didn't tell me, she said softly. He gave her a small, tired smile. Would you have believed me if I had? No, she admitted. But I do now. He picked up his mop, setting it back in the bucket. Then that's enough. As he turned away, she looked after him, not with pity, but with a new kind of respect. Behind them, the officers whispered again, but the tone had changed. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was reverence. The name Iron Ghost no longer belonged to myth. It had a face, a voice, and a quiet soul who preferred mops to medals. And as Samantha watched him disappear down the hall, she realized the base would never be the same. The air inside Monroe Air Base seemed to hold its breath. Even after Admiral Stephen Monroe's entrance, the weight of his presence lingered like thunder long after lightning had struck. Conversations that once carried the easy arrogance of rank now drifted in subdued whispers. Every man and woman on the premises felt it. Something sacred had just been disturbed, something old and reverent. Michael Stone returned to his work as if none of it mattered. Yet his steps were slower, his thoughts heavier. The mop moved in smooth arcs across the marble floor, tracing circles of reflection beneath the bright fluorescent lights. His face betrayed nothing but deep inside a storm he had tried to bury was stirring again. The name Iron Ghost was awake now. In the command office overlooking the runway, Admiral Monroe stood by the wide glass window, hands clasped behind his back. His reflection in the glass looked almost spectral against the rising morning light, a man who had seen too much sky, too much loss. General Duval sat stiffly across the room, pale and sweating. Samantha Drake stood near the doorway, her hands folded neatly, her posture composed, but her mind alert. Monroe didn't turn when he spoke. "General, you've been in command of this installation for how long?" "3 years, sir." "And in that time," Monroe said evenly, "how many of your men have you truly seen?" Duval blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, I see them daily. I oversee all operations logistics training." Monroe finally turned, his eyes sharp and cold, as cut glass stopped him mid-sentence. "No. I mean, how many have you truly seen their hearts, their burdens, their humanity?" Duval's jaw worked soundlessly. Monroe stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The measure of command isn't medals or speeches, General. It's how you treat the quietest man in the room, the one who cleans the floors you walk on." Samantha felt her pulse quicken. There was no anger in the Admiral's tone, only disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper. Sir Duval managed. "I assure you I didn't know." Monroe's voice sharpened. "You didn't care to know." He turned to Samantha. "Commander Drake, what's your assessment?" Samantha straightened. "Sir, I witnessed the incident. Mr. Stone was mocked publicly while performing his duty. He responded with restraint and professionalism. His conduct was beyond reproach." The Admiral nodded. "As expected." Duval swallowed hard. "Sir, with all due respect, the man's identity is still unverified. We don't have official confirmation he's the pilot you think he is." Monroe's gaze narrowed. "General, I don't mistake legends. I was in that cockpit formation the night Iron Ghost disappeared. I heard his voice over the comms. I heard him stay behind when the rest of us pulled out. I buried his file myself." The Admiral's voice trembled slightly at the memory. "He didn't just save my life, General. He saved the soul of the squadron." For a long moment, silence reigned. Even Duval didn't dare speak. Monroe finally exhaled and turned toward Samantha. "Commander Drake, where is Mr. Stone now?" "In the maintenance hangar, sir. Section B." "Good," Monroe said, his voice softening. "Let's pay him a visit." The hum of machinery filled Hangar B. Michael was wiping down a control console when the door swung open and the Admiral stepped in, flanked by Samantha and 2 guards. The mechanics froze mid-task. Tools clinked onto the floor. Michael turned slowly, surprise flickering across his face. "Sir." At ease, Monroe said, waving off formality. "I came to see an old comrade." The Admiral walked closer, his boots echoing on the concrete. For a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other, the weight of 30 years, and unspoken gratitude hanging between them. "You really thought you could disappear forever, didn't you?" Monroe said quietly. Michael gave a small smile. "I wasn't hiding, sir, just living." "After Ridgefire, we searched for weeks," Monroe said. "Wreckage scattered over a 10-mile radius. We thought you were gone." "I almost was," Michael replied. "The ejection failed halfway. I hit the water hard. When I woke up, it was over. I figured it was better that way. The world had enough ghosts." The Admiral's eyes softened. "You were the best of us, Iron Ghost. You flew through enemy fire to protect your team. You destroyed 6 anti-air batteries alone." Michael's voice was quiet but firm. "Not enough to save everyone." "That's war," Monroe said. "We all live with the ones we couldn't bring home." Michael looked away, the mop handle still in his hand. "I don't fly anymore, Admiral. I fix things now. Floors, doors, small lives. It's quieter that way." Monroe studied him for a long moment, then said, "That quiet doesn't erase who you are." Samantha, standing off to the side, felt her throat tighten. There was something achingly noble in the simplicity of Michael's words, in the way he carried his own ghosts without bitterness. Monroe turned to the guards. "Leave us." When they were alone, the Admiral reached into his coat and withdrew a small box. Inside lay a tarnished medal, the Distinguished Flying Cross. "You earned this long ago," he said. "But the paperwork disappeared when you did. It's yours now officially." Michael looked at it, then shook his head. "I don't need that." "It's not for you," Monroe said gently. "It's for the ones who remember." Michael hesitated, then closed the box carefully. "Then I'll keep it safe for them." Monroe smiled faintly. "Still the same man I remember." The Admiral's tone changed, quiet but purposeful. "The country could use you again, Mike. Not in the cockpit, but in the classroom. We're losing pilots faster than we can train them. We need people who remember what honor costs." Michael's expression darkened. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm not that man anymore." Monroe nodded slowly. "You are. You just forgot." Before Michael could reply, the hangar loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Admiral Monroe, addressing base staff at 1300 hours in the assembly hall." Monroe turned back to him. "Come to the address," he said. "It's time they know what kind of man's been sweeping their floors." At exactly $1,300, the hall filled with uniformed men and women. The air buzzed with speculation. Samantha stood near the front, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. Admiral Monroe took the stage. He didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. His voice carried the calm authority of truth. "Heroes don't always wear their medals," he began. "Sometimes they wear work boots and carry mops." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. 30 years ago, Monroe continued. A pilot known as Iron Ghost stayed behind to protect his unit during Operation Ridgefire. He never came home. Until now. The hall fell silent. Monroe extended a hand toward the aisle. "Michael Stone, would you join me?" Every eye turned. Michael stepped forward slowly, his gray uniform stark against the sea of polished blues. He looked uncomfortable under the spotlight, but his walk was steady, unflinching. When he reached the Admiral, Monroe turned to the audience. "This man saved my life. He saved your country, and he's been serving it quietly ever since." For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the audience began to rise. A wave of salutes swept the room. The sound of boots striking tile echoed like a heartbeat. Samantha felt tears sting her eyes. Michael didn't smile. He just nodded once deeply to the room full of people who finally saw him. Later, after the hall had emptied, Monroe found him by the exit. "You didn't have to come," the Admiral said. "I know," Michael replied softly. "But Daisy would have wanted me to." Monroe smiled. "She has your heart, then." Michael looked out the window toward the runway, where jets gleamed in the afternoon sun. "She's the reason I'm still grounded." Monroe nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's where you belong. Not in the sky, but keeping the rest of us steady." They shook hands, a silent pact of understanding. And for the first time in decades, the ghost inside Michael Stone began to rest. That evening, the sky over Monroe Base blazed orange with the last light of day. The hangars threw long shadows across the tarmac, and the air carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and iron, a smell that for Michael Stone was both memory and warning. The ceremony had ended hours ago, but the echo of applause still haunted his thoughts. He had stood on that stage, surrounded by uniforms, faces bright with awe, admiration, and guilt. They had saluted him as if he were some myth returned from legend. But all he could see behind their faces were the ghosts of those who hadn't made it home. Now alone inside Hangar C, he sat on a crate near the old A-10 Thunderbolt, mounted for display, a relic of another era. His call sign, Iron Ghost, still faintly stenciled under the cockpit canopy, was nearly faded by time. He traced the letters with a gloved hand. The paint flaked under his touch. "You held them together when everything else broke," he whispered. "Guess we both rust the same way." Footsteps echoed behind him. "Talking to ghosts, Mr. Stone." Michael didn't turn. Just the ones that listen, Commander Drake. Samantha's heels clicked softly as she approached the reflection of sunset, catching the gold on her uniform. She stopped beside him, folding her arms, studying the aircraft. "She's beautiful," she said. "They don't make planes like this anymore. They don't make pilots like that either," he said, dry but gentle. Samantha smiled faintly. "Admiral Monroe says this thing once flew through 4 SAM locks and came out with a wing full of holes." Michael nodded. "She did. I had to feather the left engine half the way back." There was a pause. Then she realized what he'd said. Her voice softened. "You were flying her." He glanced at her, an amused glint in his eyes. "She flew herself. I just hung on and prayed." They shared a quiet laugh, the first she'd ever heard from him. It sounded foreign and human, like a song rediscovered. After a moment, Samantha grew serious. "He told me the story. Admiral Monroe, about Ridgefire." Michael's gaze drifted toward the open hangar doors. Outside the runway, lights flickered to life, a necklace of amber stretching into the dusk. "Stories have a way of changing in the retelling," he said. "The real one's not much for speeches." "I'd like to hear it anyway," she said softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "We were the 75th. A-10's call signs all pulled from metal. Steel Hawk, Iron Ghost, Tin Man, Bronze Angel. The brass thought it was clever. We called ourselves the Scrapyard." Samantha smiled faintly. "It was supposed to be a routine run," he continued. "Escort convoy Bravo through the valley, 20 miles of bad weather and worse radar." Then Ridgefire lit up the sky. His voice changed calm, low, carrying the rhythm of memory. "First hit came from the Ridge SAMs. We lost Steelhawk on the first volley. Tin Man took a hit and bailed. Command called retreat, but Bravo convoy was pinned. They'd never make it out without air cover. So," he paused. "I stayed." Samantha's breath caught. "Alone." "Somebody had to," he said simply. "I cut comms so no one would order me back. Then I dropped a low-below radar, came up behind the ridgeline, and took out their launchers one by one. The sky was fire by the end. I thought I was flying into hell." He stopped. The hangar lights hummed above them. When it was over, I turned toward base. That's when they got me. Flak tore the tail apart. I remember thinking, so this is how it ends. But the ejector seat jammed. I forced it blacked out midair and woke up 3 days later on the shoreline, half dead and nameless. That's it. Samantha's throat tightened. "You saved them all." "I survived," he corrected. "They saved me." She saw something shift behind his steady eyes. Grief, yes, but something gentler too. The kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from carrying. "You never told anyone," he shrugged. "I didn't want a flag or a speech. The men who didn't come back deserved those more than I did." She studied him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You really believe that humility is a virtue, don't you?" He smiled faintly. "No, Commander. I believe pride is expensive, and I ran out of currency a long time ago." They stood in silence for a while, watching the last light fade. Then Samantha said, "Monroe's right. The Air Force could use you again, as an instructor, a mentor. You could teach them what those medals don't." Michael shook his head. "Teaching's for people who've figured it out. I'm still trying to." "You underestimate what your silence teaches," she said. He looked at her, then really looked. "And what's that?" "That courage doesn't always shout," she said softly. "Sometimes it sweeps the floor so others don't slip." Michael didn't answer, but the smallest flicker of emotion crossed his face. They turned when the hangar doors opened again. Admiral Monroe stepped in his cap under one arm. "I thought I'd find you here." "Old habits," Michael said. Monroe's eyes went to the A-10, then back to him. "You know I told the Pentagon you were gone. They called you a ghost. I guess they were right." Michael chuckled. "I'm not a ghost, Admiral. Just tired." Monroe's expression softened. "Tired men built this country, Mike, and tired men keep it from falling apart." He stepped closer. "You belong here whether you want to or not." Michael tilted his head. "What are you asking me?" Monroe hesitated. "There's a training program starting next month. Young pilots, raw, impatient, cocky. They need someone who remembers what war really costs. Not the politics. The people." Michael's gaze lingered on the plane. "They won't listen to a janitor. They'll listen to Iron Ghost," Monroe said. Samantha added quietly, "They already do." Michael turned away, exhaling slowly. For a long time, no one spoke. Then he said, "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," Monroe replied. "Just think." The Admiral started to leave but stopped at the door. "You know you saved me that night. I spent 30 years wondering why. Why risk everything for an old man you barely knew?" Michael met his eyes. "Because I could. And because someone once did it for me." Monroe nodded. Still the same answer I hoped for. He smiled and walked out. When the echo of his boots faded, Samantha looked back at Michael. "Will you take the offer?" He didn't look at her. His eyes were still on the A-10. Maybe he said, "But if I do, it won't be for them. For who then?" He looked toward the hangar doors where the night wind whispered in cool and soft. "For Daisy," he said quietly. "So she knows her dad didn't run from the sky, he just came home to it." Outside, the last light faded completely, leaving only the hum of engines in the distance. The world might remember Iron Ghost as a legend, but for the first time in decades, Michael Stone felt like a man learning to breathe again. The ghosts were still there, always would be, but they had stopped screaming. And in their silence, he finally heard something new. Hope. The next morning arrived soft and gray, a thin mist rolling over the airfield like a veil. The base woke slowly, hangar lights flickering to life engines coughing awake, distant footsteps echoing down metal corridors. But one man was already moving before the bugle sounded. Michael Stone parked his battered pickup at the edge of the runway and stepped out, coffee steaming in his hand. The air was cool, clean, and heavy with the promise of rain. He stood for a while watching the sun fight its way through the fog. It had been a long night. He hadn't slept much. The ghosts of his past had been quieter than usual, but they hadn't left. They rarely did. Yesterday's ceremony had left him unsettled. The applause, the reverence, it was all too loud. He had spent years earning silence, and now they wanted to make him a symbol again. He wasn't sure which was harder, dying once in the sky or being reborn in the eyes of others. Inside the officers' building, Samantha Drake was reviewing paperwork when her phone buzzed. From ADM, Monroe Subject Consultant Assignment, urgent. She opened the message. "Mr. Stone will be departing base unless you can convince him otherwise. Do not let that happen." Samantha exhaled slowly. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the flight line. Michael was standing beside the chain-link fence, staring at the horizon. His old badge hung loosely from his pocket, a relic of a life he never meant to revisit. Daisy's drawing a stick-figure pilot labeled Iron Dad was tucked in his wallet. It had traveled everywhere with him these past few years, a reminder that he'd chosen life over legend. He didn't turn when Samantha approached. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. He smiled faintly. "I thought I'd left early enough to avoid speeches." "You didn't." She came to stand beside him. The fog curled around the two of them like smoke. So she began softly, "You're really leaving?" Michael nodded. "It's time. I've done enough damage stirring up old stories." "You didn't stir them up," she said. "Truth has a way of surfacing even when people bury it under polish and pride." He sipped his coffee. Truth doesn't always do good when it surfaces. Sometimes it wrecks the peace. Samantha studied his profile, calm, lined with quiet strength. Peace isn't the same as hiding. He turned to her, then eyes steady but tired. "You think I'm hiding?" She hesitated. "I think you've been carrying guilt that isn't yours." "That's not hiding, it's punishment." Michael didn't reply. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying with it the faint scent of jet fuel and wet grass. "You have a daughter?" Samantha continued, her voice gentler now. "She looks up to you. What do you think she sees when you walk away from who you are?" His jaw tightened. "She sees her father trying to be here, not up there, not gone again." Samantha nodded slowly. "You're right. She needs you alive. But maybe she also needs to see you whole." He frowned slightly. She stepped closer. "Admiral Monroe believes you could teach the next generation of pilots. I think he's right. You could help them learn what courage actually means. You could save lives again without leaving the ground." Michael chuckled softly. "You sound like the Admiral." "Good," she said. "He's smarter than both of us." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes, but it faded quickly. "You don't understand what you're asking. Teaching them means remembering every face I lost, every scream over the radio, every second I bought for men who never got to grow old." She looked at him with quiet compassion. "Maybe remembering is the only way to make it mean something." They stood in silence for a long time. A pair of cadets jogged past, saluting automatically as they recognized Michael. He returned the gesture out of habit, then seemed to regret it. Samantha placed a hand on the fence. "If you walk away, General Duval wins. He'll tell everyone the legend was just a myth. But if you stay..." She looked at him steadily. "Then every airman who believes in you gets to see that humility isn't weakness. It's strength, with its sleeves rolled up." Michael stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or curse. "You always talk like that." "Only when I mean it." He chuckled again, softer, almost grateful. The sound of a distant plane cut through the fog. A training flight circling low. Its engine's hum vibrated through the ground beneath them. Michael watched it bank rise and vanish into cloud. For a moment, his expression changed to something fierce and familiar flickering in his eyes. He whispered almost to himself, "They'll need steady hands." "They'll need yours," Samantha said. He turned toward her, then sighed. "You really don't give up." "Do you?" "No," she said. "Neither did you." He looked down at his coffee, then poured the rest into the grass. "Guess I'll need a better reason to get up in the mornings." Samantha smiled. "Training rookies has that effect." Michael looked back at the runway one last time. The fog was lifting sunlight, catching the wings of parked jets, painting them gold. "If I do this," he said quietly, "it has to be on my terms. No medals, no speeches, just teaching." She nodded. "Done. And one more thing," he added. "No one calls me Iron Ghost." "Then what should they call you?" He thought for a moment. "Just Mike." Samantha smiled. "Welcome back, Mike." Later that day, Monroe sat at his desk, signing off on reports when Samantha entered. "He's staying," she said simply. The Admiral looked up, a small, knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "I had a feeling he would. He has conditions," she added. "He wants no publicity." Monroe chuckled. "That sounds like him." He leaned back, folding his hands. "There's something about men like stone. They don't return for glory. They return because something inside them still believes they're needed." Samantha hesitated. "He said he's doing it for his daughter." Monroe's gaze softened. Even better reason. At sunset, Michael stood outside the training hangar. The air smelled of hot metal and fuel. Young cadets ran drills across the tarmac, their shouts echoing under the fading light. He watched quietly, remembering what it felt like to be one of them, eager, reckless, alive. One of the instructors waved him over. "Sir, Mr. Stone, we're just finishing the first round." "Want to say a few words?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet." As the cadets jogged past, a few saluted him. One grinned. "We heard about you, sir. They say you're the reason Ridgefire wasn't a massacre." Michael looked at the boy, barely 20 eyes full of the same fire he'd once carried. "Son," he said, "it's not about what they say. It's about who you bring home." The young man nodded thoughtful, as if trying to understand something that couldn't be taught. Michael watched him disappear into the hangar, then looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, the sight didn't ache. It called. He wasn't returning to the clouds, but he had found a way to serve them again from the ground up. And somewhere in that soft hum of engines, he thought he heard Daisy's voice, bright, innocent, steady whispering through the wind. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the streets slick and silver under the first soft light. Inside the small yellow house on the edge of town, Michael Stone stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out Daisy's cereal bowl. The radio hummed quietly in the background, a country ballad about second chances. Daisy sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath the chair, a pencil clutched in her small hand. She was drawing again, tongue poking out in concentration. Crayons scattered around her like ammunition in a battlefield of color. Michael turned off the faucet, drying his hands on a towel. "You're up early, kiddo." She didn't look up. "Couldn't sleep." "Something wrong?" "Nope," she said. "Something right." He smiled, pouring himself coffee. "That's so, uh-huh." She leaned closer to the paper, sketching furiously. "You went to the base yesterday. I saw it on TV. He nearly choked on his coffee." "You what?" "They showed you standing next to the Admiral. Everyone was saluting. Mrs. Whitman said you used to be a pilot, but I told her you're a janitor, and that's even better." He set the mug down, chuckling. "Better, huh?" "Yeah, pilots just fly." She looked up, grinning. "Janitors fix things." The simple wisdom of children, he thought. He reached out, gently tousling her hair. "You've got a way of seeing things, Daisy. I see you, Daddy." He froze at that, how easily she said it, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. Daisy turned the drawing around, holding it up for him. "Here." The paper was bright in chaotic lines of color, crossing like contrails. In the center stood a man in a green flight suit, his hands holding a mop like a staff. Above him, a small plane with a smiling face flew through clouds shaped like hearts. Beneath it, written in blocky letters, were the words, "Iron Dad." Michael laughed softly, but his eyes blurred. "You gave me wings again." "They're not wings," Daisy said matter-of-factly. "They're for balance." He knelt beside her, his voice quiet. "Balance, huh?" She nodded. "You told me once, brave people don't fly away, they stay and help." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Did I say that?" "Yeah," she said proudly. "You forget stuff sometimes." He hugged her close, her hair warm against his cheek. "Then it's good I have you to remind me." She giggled and squeezed his neck. "Don't go anywhere today, okay?" He hesitated. "I have to go to the base later, just for a bit." Her smile dimmed. "But you just got back." "I know," he said softly. "But this time it's different. I'm not going up. I'm staying on the ground, helping other people learn." Daisy tilted her head, thinking, like a teacher. Something like that. She seemed to accept that, nodding slowly. "Then can I make you a lunchbox? Teachers need lunchboxes." He smiled. "Deal." Later that morning, the base buzzed with the energy of training day. New cadets lined the tarmac, bright-eyed and nervous. Michael watched from the edge clipboard, in hand feeling oddly at peace. The wind carried the scent of jet fuel and rain-washed asphalt, a blend that for the first time in years didn't hurt to breathe. Samantha Drake approached from the control tower, her hair tied back, expression focused but softening when she saw him. "Morning, Mike. Morning, Commander. You ready for your first day?" He smirked. "Been cleaning up after officers for 3 years. This can't be harder." She laughed lightly. "You'll find pilots are messier." He nodded toward the cadets. "So was I." Samantha glanced at the group, men and women, barely old enough to drink, yet trusted with millions of dollars of machinery. "They respect you already," she said. "Half of them spent last night looking up Operation Ridgefire." Michael groaned. "That's exactly what I didn't want." "Too late," she said with a smile. "You're officially the ghost that walks." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess there are worse things to be." Hours passed quickly. Michael moved among the cadets, explaining flight protocols, reading their body language, correcting their stances. He didn't talk much about tactics. Instead, he taught rhythm, how to listen to an aircraft, how to feel the engine through the seat, how silence between orders can save lives. When one of the students fumbled a simulation and cursed under his breath, Michael said quietly, "Don't swear at the sky. It has a long memory." The cadet blinked. Sir Michael smiled. "You'll understand one day." From the control tower, Samantha watched, arms folded. Monroe joined her hands clasped behind his back. "He's better than I hoped," Monroe said. "He doesn't even realize it," Samantha replied. "That's why it works." When Michael finally drove home that evening, Daisy was waiting on the porch, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. She jumped up as soon as he parked. "Daddy, did you teach the pilots?" He lifted her into his arms. "Tried to. Did they listen?" "Some did. Some didn't." "Then tell them to listen better," she said seriously. "You're the best at teaching." He laughed, setting her down. "Oh yeah. How would you know?" She crossed her arms. "I taught you to smile again, didn't I?" That stopped him cold. For a heartbeat, he couldn't find words. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "Yeah, sweetheart. You did." That night, after Daisy fell asleep, Michael sat at his old desk. The small wooden box lay open before him. Inside were the medals, the photo of his squadron, and now Daisy's drawing folded carefully atop them. He stared at it for a long time. The crayon lines were clumsy, the colors bright and wild, but it was truer than any official record. He took out one of his old flight tags and turned it over. The back was blank. He reached for a pen and etched 2 words, "Iron Dad." The motion was slow, deliberate. When he finished, he exhaled, setting the tag beside the drawing. For the first time in years, he didn't see ghosts when he closed his eyes. He saw light, warm, steady, ordinary light, like the kind that spills from a child's night lamp. And in that light, Michael Stone finally understood something simple. Heroism wasn't in the skies. It was at the kitchen table, in the laughter that followed burnt toast, in the way Daisy reached for his hand without fear. He wasn't Iron Ghost anymore. That man had vanished with the war. But Iron Dad, that man, had just begun to live. The next morning, Monroe found a note on his desk. It was short, written in Michael's steady hand. "Thank you for reminding me who I was, but more importantly, for letting me be who I am now." MS. Monroe smiled, folded the note, and placed it inside his coat. Out on the runway, a small girl's laughter echoed faintly through the open air as a single plane took off into the sunrise. The storm came without warning. By mid-afternoon, Monroe Air Base was wrapped in low clouds and restless wind. The forecast had promised clear skies for the training flight, a simple exercise for 6 cadets in the simulator wing, and 1 live aircraft on standby. But the sky above didn't care for forecasts. Inside the control tower, Samantha Drake leaned over the radar console. The technician's voice cracked through the headset. Wind speed climbing to 35 knots and rising. Visibility dropping to 2 miles. Pull the cadet in, she ordered. Now. The operator adjusted his dials. Ma'am, he's already on descent, but his comms are scratchy. Might be losing signal. Samantha's pulse quickened. Who's flying Cadet Riley, ma'am? Training under schedule Bravo 9. Riley, barely 21, bright too brave for his own good. Samantha pressed her earpiece closer. Riley, this is Control. Copy static. She turned toward the technician. Patch to backup frequency. More static. Then faintly, Control can't stabilize instrument spinning. The radio cut again. Samantha's eyes darted to the window. Out beyond the runway, the horizon was smeared gray and white rain slashing sideways. A single aircraft, a training jet, flashed in and out of cloud. Too low, too fast. Damn it. She grabbed the mic. Cadet Riley, this is Commander Drake. Pull up to 5,000, do you copy? Trying controls not responding? She turned to the tech. Who's on ground command for maintenance? The man hesitated. Stone, ma'am. Mr. Stone's supervising the fuel wing today. Get him here. Now. Down on the hangar floor, Michael Stone was inspecting an engine panel when the alarm blared. The storm's first rumble of thunder rolled overhead, shaking the roof. An officer sprinted toward him, breathless. Sir Commander Drake requests you in the tower immediately. Training jets in trouble. Michael's face hardened. What kind of trouble? Instrument failure? Comms unstable. He didn't ask another question. The old instinct kicked in, the one he thought he'd buried with his call sign. He stripped off his gloves and strode toward the jeep waiting by the hangar door. Rain lashed against the windshield as they tore across the tarmac. By the time he reached the control tower, the storm was howling. Samantha was at the console headset pressed tight, her expression taut with focus. He's losing altitude, she said the moment she saw him. Autopilot's unresponsive attitude gyro spinning wild. We're down to manual control, but he's green. He's panicking. Michael stepped beside her. Let me see the telemetry. The technician hesitated, then slid the monitor toward him. The lines danced, altimeter dropping, roll angle erratic. Michael read it like a pulse. Throttle's overcompensating. He's fighting the wind instead of riding it. Samantha looked at him. You can talk him down. Michael nodded slowly. Patch me in. The technician switched channels. Michael put on the headset. Riley, this is Stone. Do you copy? There was a burst of static, then a thin, frightened voice. Who is this? Just someone who's flown through worse, Michael said calmly. Listen to me, son. Don't fight the storm. Respect it. I can't. She's shaking. That's because you're gripping the stick too tight, Michael said. Ease your right hand. Breathe. Let her tell you what she needs. Samantha watched as his voice, steady and unhurried, began to bleed, calm into the chaos. The technician's eyes widened. The telemetry stabilized just slightly. That's it, Michael continued. Now look out your left window. See that flash? That's the tower beacon. Head for it 1 degree at a time. Don't chase it. Glide toward it. I think I see it. Good. Trust it. And trust yourself. Another surge of static. Samantha glanced at the radar. Altitude dropping too fast, he's still coming in heavy. Michael leaned closer to the mic. Riley, you've got to bleed speed. Flaps to 25, throttle back 5%. Don't dump it. You'll stall. Nice and slow. Feel the wings. I can't, she's shaking again. Then let her dance, Michael said. You lead the rhythm. She'll follow. Samantha looked at him in awe. His tone wasn't technical. It was human. The kind of instruction born from the edge of survival. On the screen, the altimeter slowed. The pitch steadied. Good. You're back in control. Now line up with runway 08. You've got crosswind from the left 20 knots. Compensate with rudder. Gentle, not brute force. Copy. The signal cut. Lost comms again, the tech said. Samantha clenched her fists, distance half a mile and closing. Michael stared through the rain-streaked window. For a heartbeat, the sky was empty. Then a faint shape emerged, wobbling through the gray. The training jet. He pressed the mic again. Riley, this is Stone. You're doing fine. Hold her steady. Can't too much crosswind. Yes, you can, Michael said. Voice low but sharp. Because you're not alone. You've got every man who ever flew that sky with you. Just bring her home. The runway lights flared through the rain. The jet descended too steep too fast. Samantha held her breath. Flare now, Michael shouted. The nose lifted just enough. Tires screeched. Sparks flashed as the wheels hit the wet tarmac, bouncing once, twice, and then miraculously, the aircraft settled skidding but intact. Applause erupted through the tower. The techs cheered. Samantha exhaled a laugh of relief, pressing her hands to her chest. Michael lowered the headset quiet again. Good work, kid, he murmured. Samantha turned to him, eyes shining. You just saved that boy's life. He shook his head. He saved himself. I just reminded him to listen. Monroe's voice came through the intercom. Tower, this is Admiral Monroe. Status. Samantha replied. Cadet Riley down safe, sir. Thanks to Mr. Stone. A pause, then Monroe's warm voice. Of course it was. Tell him the base owes him again. Michael smiled faintly. He'll deny it. Samantha grinned. He already is. Later, when the storm had passed, and the air smelled clean again, Michael walked alone across the runway. The rain had left small mirrors of light in every puddle. He stopped halfway crouched and touched the wet concrete. He remembered nights like this in another lifetime, where every landing felt like a prayer, answered where men measured courage, not in medals, but in minutes lived past the odds. Samantha approached quietly, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to him. You know you could have stayed in that tower and just watched. Wouldn't have made a difference, he said. It did, she replied. Not just for Riley, for everyone who saw you today. Michael looked out toward the dark horizon. Storms don't scare me, but fame does. She smiled. Then maybe that's why you're the right kind of hero. He said nothing, only took a slow sip of coffee. The airfield lights reflected off the puddles like 1,000 fallen stars. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled one last time, faint like applause fading into memory. Samantha's voice broke the silence. You know what he called you when he got out of the jet? Michael glanced at her. What? She smiled. He said, Tell Iron Ghost thank you. He chuckled, shaking his head. Guess some names never die. Maybe they're not meant to, she said softly. For a long time, neither spoke again. They just stood there, side by side, 2 quiet souls in the aftermath of a storm, watching the sky clear. And for once, the ghosts in the clouds seemed at peace. The morning after the storm dawned bright and clear, as if the world itself wanted to apologize for the chaos of the night before. The runways shimmered under a soft breeze, and the smell of wet tarmac still lingered, a reminder of how close the base had come to tragedy. In the break room of the training wing, the cadets gathered around a small table, cups of coffee steaming between them. They were quieter than usual, their bravado tempered. The oldest among them, Cadet Riley, stared at his untouched drink. His hand still trembled slightly. I froze up, he muttered. I almost lost it up there. Across the table, one of his friends shook his head. You didn't. You landed. Everyone saw. Because of him, Riley said softly. That that instructor. Stone. The door opened then, and all conversation stopped. Michael Stone stepped inside a folder under his arm sleeves, rolled up the same quiet presence that had become his signature. His gaze moved across the room, steady, calm, fatherly in its way. Riley stood quickly, straightening his posture. Sir Michael waved a hand. "Sit down, son. You did fine." The young man hesitated. "Sir." I panicked. "I shouldn't have everyone panics," Michael interrupted gently. "It's what you do after that matters." Riley swallowed. "I thought I was done for. The whole time I just kept thinking, don't let me die this way. Not in training." Michael nodded slowly. "You lived. That's what counts. The rest, what you do with it, that's where you learn." The cadets looked at him, waiting for more. Michael pulled up a chair and sat, folding his arms on the table. "When I was younger," he began, "I thought flying was about power, about control. But the sky doesn't care how good you are. It humbles you every single time. You can't fight it. You can only learn to listen." He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "You'll all make mistakes. Some will scare you. Some might scar you. But every pilot, every decent human being earns their wings by facing the wind, not running from it." Silence filled the room. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Michael stood. "You'll be flying again next week, Riley. I'll be on comms. We'll take it slow." Riley nodded, his eyes steady now. "Yes, sir." Michael gave a faint smile. "And Riley, next time trust yourself sooner. You're better than you think." As he left the room, Samantha Drake stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching. When their eyes met, she smiled. "You've got away with them," he smirked. "I just talk less than the other instructors." She fell into step beside him as they walked down the hall. "No, Mike, you listen more." He said nothing, but she caught the hint of a blush beneath the gruff calm. By afternoon, the base was running smoothly again. Reports filed, maintenance checks complete. Admiral Monroe's orders had come through officially. That morning, Michael Stone was now the civilian chief instructor for tactical emergency response, a title he neither wanted nor objected to. He was in the hangar reviewing data logs when Samantha approached, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You missed lunch," she said, handing him one. He took it with a nod. "I was hungry for silence." "You sure it's not for solitude?" she teased. He chuckled. "Same thing most days." They sat on a low step overlooking the open hangar doors. Beyond them, the horizon stretched endlessly blue. A pair of jets taxied for takeoff, engines roaring to life. The sunlight glinted off their wings, blinding and beautiful. Samantha took a sip of her coffee. "I can't believe you didn't go back to flying." "I did," he said, "just not in the air." She looked at him curiously. He gestured toward the tarmac. "Every time one of those kids takes off with a steadier hand, that's me flying. Every time they come home safe, I land with them." Samantha smiled faintly. "That's the best answer I've ever heard." He looked at her for a moment, long enough for the quiet between them to turn warm. "You've been watching over me, Commander. It's part of my job," she said, then hesitated. "But maybe I stopped doing it just for the job." He didn't reply, but the silence said enough. The air shifted, soft, uncertain, honest. Samantha turned back toward the runway. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were stubborn. Quiet to the point of arrogance." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And now I think you're just brave enough to be gentle." He chuckled. "That might be the kindest insult I've ever received." She grinned. It wasn't an insult. For a while they just watched the sky. Jets took off one after another, their shadows cutting across the sunlit concrete. Each roar faded into silence, replaced by the whisper of wind through the hangar. Finally, Samantha broke the quiet. "Does the sky still call you Mike?" He took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Every day." And in every day, he said, I remind it that I've got someone waiting at home who calls louder. Samantha's expression softened. "Daisy." He nodded. "She's my mission now." She smiled. Then she's lucky. So are we. That evening, Monroe called a small meeting in the operations room. He stood before a modest crowd of instructors and officers, his voice steady and proud. Yesterday could have been a tragedy, he began. But thanks to the calm hands and sharp mind of a man we're lucky to call one of our own, it wasn't. He turned toward Michael, who stood near the back, uncomfortable with the attention. Mr. Stone Monroe continued, "You taught us something more valuable than any manual ever could, that leadership isn't about noise or medals. It's about faith. Faith in others. Faith in yourself. And faith that no matter how dark the storm, someone will be there to light the way home." The room erupted in quiet applause. Michael dipped his head politely, wishing he could vanish into the floor. When the meeting ended, Samantha caught up to him in the hall. "You hate compliments, don't you?" "They make me itch," he admitted. She laughed. "Then consider this an anti-itch remedy." She reached into her jacket and handed him a small box. "From Daisy. She asked me to give it to you." Michael opened it. Inside was a keychain, 2 small wings cut out of wood, hand-painted in bright crayon colors. On the back, written in clumsy letters, "For Dad, so you never fall." He stared at it, speechless. Samantha's voice softened. "She told me she made them because her daddy already knows how to fly. He just forgot to believe it." Michael's throat tightened. "She's got your knack for speeches." "She's got your heart," Samantha said quietly. He smiled, then tucking the keychain into his pocket. "Guess that makes us both her students." Later that night, when the base was quiet, Michael walked the runway one last time before heading home. The lights stretched endlessly ahead, twin rows of gold leading into the dark. He paused halfway, listening to the hum of a distant jet fading into stars. He realized he wasn't haunted anymore. The ghosts were still there, but they weren't dragging him backward. They were guiding him forward. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the smallest spark of joy. Not the roaring kind, the quiet kind, the kind that stays. The day of the ceremony dawned quiet and golden, a kind of morning that made everything on base gleam like polished honor. Flags stirred lazily in the breeze, their red and white stripes mirrored in the puddles from last night's drizzle. The faint hum of jets in the distance lent the air its familiar rhythm, steady, loyal, alive. Michael Stone stood in front of his mirror, tightening the old service tie he hadn't worn in over a decade. His hands were slower now, but sure. Daisy sat cross-legged on the bed behind him, watching her father with the patient curiosity only a child could carry. "Do you have to wear that serious face, Daddy?" she asked. He looked at her reflection and smiled faintly. "It's a ceremony. Serious faces come with the territory." She wrinkled her nose. "You look like you're going to court." "Close," he said with a small laugh. "They're giving me something I don't think I deserve." "What is it?" He hesitated. "A medal. For things that happened a long time ago." She tilted her head. "Then it's for you and your friends." "Right." Michael turned to her, touched by how easily she understood. "Yeah, sweetheart. For all of us." She picked up his cap from the nightstand, brushing it off like a tiny officer, and handed it to him. "Then make sure you stand straight so they can see you proud." He took it gently, his throat tightening. "Yes, ma'am." The auditorium at Monroe Base filled quickly. Officers, cadets, technicians, even local townsfolk. The press had been barred from entry at Michael's request, but word of the event had spread anyway. People came not for spectacle, but to be near the kind of story that reminded them goodness still existed quietly among them. Samantha Drake stood near the podium, immaculate in her dress whites, organizing the program sheets. Her composure was calm, but her eyes flicked often toward the side entrance. When she finally saw Michael and Daisy walk in, a small, involuntary smile crossed her face. Michael paused at the threshold, scanning the rows of uniforms. The clatter of chairs died to murmurs, then to silence. He wasn't used to the attention, but Daisy squeezed his hand, once her small fingers firm, grounding him. "Go on, Daddy," she whispered. Admiral Monroe took the podium, his voice steady, resonant. "There are moments in a nation's story," he began, "when a single act of courage defines not only a mission, but the character of the men who serve." He let the words breathe before continuing. 30 years ago, during Operation Ridgefire, one pilot broke formation and turned back into the flames to save his squadron. He was reported missing, presumed dead. But legends don't die, they simply wait for us to catch up. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Monroe's tone grew quiet. He returned not to applause, but to silence. He lived among us, cleaning our halls, carrying our burdens in humility, while we walked past him blind. Today, that blindness ends. He looked to his right. Michael Stone, Iron Ghost, stepped forward. The sound of those words struck the room like a heartbeat. Michael exhaled, slowly kissed Daisy's forehead and walked to the stage. Each step felt like both a memory and a promise. When he reached Monroe, the Admiral saluted him, not as superior to subordinate, but as one soldier to another. "You once told me peace was better than medals," Monroe said quietly. "But sometimes, peace deserves to be honored too." He pinned the Medal of Honor to Michael's chest, the silver catching the sunlight like a flash of wings. For a moment, neither man spoke. Monroe's eyes glistened faintly. Then Michael turned to face the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back, some tearful, some smiling, all reverent. He could have refused to speak, but he felt Daisy watching, and something in her gaze asked him to. He stepped toward the microphone. "I don't have much to say," he began. His voice was low, steady. "I was never good at speeches. I was good at fixing things. Sometimes planes, sometimes floors, sometimes myself." A gentle ripple of laughter broke the tension. "I'm standing here because of the people who never got to. Brave men who flew beside me. They deserve this more than I do. I kept their names in my heart all these years, and I tried to honor them the only way I knew, by staying useful, by being kind." He paused, scanning the room, his gaze lingering on the young cadets in the front row. "You don't have to save the world to be a hero. Sometimes the biggest act of courage is showing up every day, doing your job with decency and love, even when no one's watching." He looked toward Monroe, then Samantha, then Daisy. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's this service doesn't end when the war does. It just changes shape." He nodded once. "So thank you for letting an old man learn that lesson out loud." The hall erupted into applause, not the polite kind, but the full-bodied standing kind that comes from gratitude deeper than words. Daisy clapped the loudest, her little hands echoing like a drumbeat. Monroe leaned toward him, smiling. "Well?" said Mike. Michael smiled back. "I had a good teacher." After the ceremony, the crowd thinned. Michael stood outside beneath the fluttering flag, the afternoon sun warm on his face. Samantha joined him, her cap tucked under her arm. "You handled that like a pro," she said. "I handled it like a man who wanted it to end quickly," he replied with a half-smile. She laughed softly, still humble. He shrugged. Humility's cheaper than therapy. They walked together toward the parking lot. Daisy ran ahead, chasing the wind, her laughter spilling across the open space. Samantha glanced at her. She looked so much like her mother. Michael's voice softened. "Yeah, she's got her eyes and her courage." Samantha looked at him, and her father's heart. For a moment, the world went still. The flag cracked gently in the wind, a salute of its own. Samantha reached out and touched his arm. "You ever think you'll fly again?" He looked toward the sky, where a single jet streaked through the blue, leaving a white ribbon of vapor in its wake. "I already am," he said quietly. She smiled. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward Daisy, who was now drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. "She's the wings now. I just try to keep her steady." They stood there in silence, two soldiers who'd carried their share of storms, watching a child draw sunlight into the ground. At that moment, an honor guard marched past, raising their hands in salute. Michael turned instinctively and returned at his motion crisp and sure. The last salute, not to himself, but to everything that had carried him here. Friendship, sacrifice, love, and the small, unspoken grace of being remembered. That night back home, Daisy hung his medal on the wall beside her crayon drawings. "Looks better here," she declared. Michael laughed. "Why's that?" "Because it's close to me," she said simply. He knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Then that's exactly where it belongs." Outside, the night was calm. The stars above blinked like distant runway lights guiding someone home. Michael Stone stood by the window, watching the horizon fade into silver darkness. He had given everything once for the sky, and in return, it had given him back the earth, his daughter, and a peace he hadn't known he still needed. He smiled quietly. At ease, Ghost, he whispered to the night, "Mission complete." And somewhere in the vast silence beyond the sky seemed to salute back. "We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Whether it's a small town, a quiet porch, or somewhere halfway across the world, your stories and your presence mean so much to us." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more moments of kindness, courage, and hope. Stories that remind us what truly matters. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until the next story, take care of yourself, hold your loved ones close, and never forget, even the quietest hearts can carry the loudest courage.